So, Greg Grieve, welcome to the Plant Yourself podcast.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it, especially considering the situation we're in. So I'm glad you've taken the time.
Yeah, well, I saw the article that you co-wrote about sort of these mindfulness apps or these sort of proto-Buddhist apps actually not kind of living up to maybe some people's expectations of what they could be. And I guess you're a practicing Buddhist, so you're approaching this both as a scientist and as a consumer. And I read it, and my first thought was, like, I felt the same way, but I just felt like a curmudgeon, and I didn't want to mention anything because it just felt so. Maybe begin by just sharing a little bit about what was in the article and what motivated you to write it.
So I should say, first of all, this is part of a larger. Bev Maguire, who's a professor at in Wilmington in North Carolina, she and I have been talking about this for many years, and we're part of a group of people it's been funded by the Luce Foundation out of the Berkeley Buddhist Center there. And basically, so we've been talking about telepresence and different ways that religion works over digital media. And so I just want to kind of give her some credit because a lot of this comes out of our conversations over the years. And just to summarize it as briefly as possible, both of us had certain concerns about the Buddhist apps. Just to be more fair, I was actually I always tried to be as fair as I could towards them, because if you look at Buddhism, there is no pure form of Buddhism. It changes as it evolves from Asia into North America. It's changed a lot. It changes depending on the different cultures it goes through. But she and I talked a lot about it, and basically this is the conclusion that we came to, which is, first of all, the studies show that the apps do have a lot of health benefits for people. So it's not like they don't do anything. The mindfulness is very, very good at calming people down and helping them be mindful of their situation, and all of that does have scientifically proven health benefits.
Okay.
And for me, the kind of the anecdote that really shows it the most is that I was actually flying home one time from New York City back to North Carolina, and it was one of those terrible flights where you think you're gonna die. And it's the worst one. I've flown many hours in my life. This is the worst one I ever had, and everyone else was freaking out. I was freaking out. But the only person who was remaining calm through the whole thing was this woman who was using one of these Buddhist apps in the seat in front of me. So in some ways, that for me epitomized it. We're going through this, for a number of different reasons. We have a very stormy culture at the moment, and the Buddhist apps are helping people be calm. So there's no doubt that they do have proven effects. I've used them, and I've found them useful. So I don't want to say they're completely untrue or that they're not useful in some way. That said, first of all, they're really lucrative. So, they do make people a lot of money. There's no doubt. I don't have the figures with me, but it's, probably a $100 million industry at least of people making money off of these. So that was something that we wrote about too. And I'm not too concerned with that. If you look at religion and spirituality, people have always made money off it. So, I think there's this notion that things which are spiritual and things which are religious should not also be lucrative. I'm not as concerned about that, to tell you the truth. What we really wanted to talk about was, were they Buddhist?
Mm-hmm.
And this is where it gets kind of tricky because there's no Buddhist Pope, there's no Buddhist Bible, there's nothing, how is it that what litmus test do you use to decide whether it's Buddhist or not?
Right. Well,
Yeah.
what got me into this, so I'm not a card carrying Buddhist or a non-card carrying Buddhist.
Yeah.
But I saw a cartoon that had a big influence on my thinking about this, where this businessman with a briefcase and the tie and the suit is standing up very proud and tall and says, wow, I just meditated for 20 minutes. I feel like I could conquer the world. And then, on the ground is like a Hindu religious figure says, well, maybe if you'd meditated for an hour, you wouldn't feel the need to conquer the world.
Yeah, and so that's kind of what we were arguing. Basically, we're saying, are these causing people to be better Buddhists, better human beings, or are they basically just allowing them to function better as kind of capitalistic pawns or as businessmen? And we came down on the side saying that in the end, we think that they're really more part of kind of late capitalism than they are Buddhism. And again, as you said, I kind of feel like a curmudgeon saying that, because I know lots of people who do use them and find them useful. And again, there's some there's some there's an app that the Dalai Lama makes, which actually doesn't fall into that, right? So I mean, it doesn't kind of promote that businessman. It does actually. It promotes you thinking of how you're interdependent and codependent and interrelated with other people, rather than trying to booster you as an individual who then can go out and conquer the world, right? Does that make sense? So there are some apps that are like that, but the ones that we looked at, the major ones, for the most part, were not.
And I guess you're talking about I guess the 80% market share is Headspace and Calm.
Right. And we looked at that, and I've written a lot about some other ones too, which I'm not going to name, but yes, but basically, yes. So with those ones, we came out and we figured that they have some Buddhist flavor to them, but I don't know if they would be considered Buddhism from our from our point of view.
Right. Well, and one thing that I've come to this. So one of the meditation teachers that I follow is a guy named Adyashanti. Who's out in Oakland, and his whole thing is we're not doing spirituality to have a better life. We're doing spirituality to discover the truth about reality. He says the way a lot of people meditate is just simply tranquilized egos. This is I'd much rather be around tranquilized egos than untranquilized egos, but that's not what his understanding of spirituality is about, which is to discern the nature of reality. And when I look at I did Headspace for a year, I like his voice. It was a very cool app. It was pretty, and then they kept coming up with these new packets, like the focus packet and the creativity packet, and I like focus, I like creativity, and I also felt like somehow the product was going to be my success in the marketplace.
I completely agree with you. And that's kind of what we ended up with. And basically what we decided was, I don't want to start to use technical lingo, but that it was a way of creating neoliberal subjects rather than doing what Buddhism is, which is trying to give you insight into how the world is put together for the betterment of you and other people in the world. And it seemed more like, how do we make you a better commodity so that you can function better in the marketplace? And that's
so is that what you mean by neoliberal commodity?
So neoliberalism, I was trying not to go here because I didn't want to get all technical, but basically, if you think about capitalism is not just about the accumulation of wealth. It's about everything in the social life has to be channeled through the marketplace. And so everything gets channeled through the marketplace, and there's different forms of capitalism, and pretty much from the 1930s on, from the Depression until the early 70s, there was kind of a managed capitalism in which it wasn't deregulated. But starting in the early 70s, for a number of reasons, all of those kind of managed parts were taken off. So everything became deregulated. And
right, so the invisible hand is going to make everything more efficient. AT&T is going to go away, and we're going to get innovation in telecom.
Right.
Supply and demand will rationalize everything, and we're going to lift the world out of poverty.
Right. That's, that would be the ideology. But, those of us who lived through it knew that a lot of what was going, I mean, that was the story that would want to be told. But in fact, what ends up happening is that we lose a lot of the traditional social backings that we have for, basically our well-being. And so one of the ways to do that would be under the guise of Buddhism to kind of create these better marketable, you basically become a better human being so that you do better in the marketplace, and that shows that you're successful.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not Buddhism. I mean, that's using kind of these ancient Asian mystery religions to actually buffer the ego rather than to question it and to understand how the ego is. The ego only comes about in relationship to other people. So it's kind of doing almost the exact opposite of what I would say Buddhism is supposed to do. Right? Does that make sense? And again, I don't want to like harsh on people's mellow, because I know that people really like these, and I don't want to say that there's one fundamentalist form of Buddhism, but I really do think that that these apps need to be critically looked at to see if they're actually doing what they claim to be doing.
Right. Well, I remember when I first heard that Howard Stern was a meditator. And he did, his TM, Transcendental Meditation, 20 minutes every morning and minutes every night. And I thought, but he's a terrible person, right? And at that, like that was my judgment of him at the time, whether
Right.
that was true or not. Certainly he was crude, and I found it extremely offensive. But it was really hard for me to connect those two, to see that, okay, here's someone who's in this, this sort of ancient tradition of self-knowledge, is then going out and just being successful as a shock jock. And I've since, come to know, I've been in the entrepreneurial world for a long time. And so there's, it's like Tony Robbins will tell you to meditate, and Ray Dalio, the world's greatest hedge fund manager, will meditate. And they're all touting it as this neurohack that doesn't seem to affect the content or the quality of what they end up putting out into the world.
Yeah, so let me say I agree with you, but let me just kind of make it let me problematize it just and so first of all, Buddhism is not some innocent religion also, right? So I mean, Buddhism I've been drinking out of mason jars too this whole time.
Oh, yeah, half a gallon.
No, that's what I've been doing. I have a huge one downstairs. So Buddhism's not an innocent religion, right? There's always this notion, and I could go into the history of why in North America it's kind of considered, why is Buddhism good and Islam bad, right? And why, the historical background to it. But in World War II, basically Zen Buddhism was used to justify kamikaze pilots. It was used to justify Japanese imperial aggression. So Buddhism, it's been used. Samurais used it to, killing without mind was, to justify it. We saw it in Myanmar just recently that Buddhism was used to justify the expulsion of Muslim refugees. So Buddhism's not, it can be like any ideology. It can be used for bad purposes, right? So that's not the thing here. I'm not saying that they're misusing Buddhism, okay, because Buddhism has been used for bad purposes. My thing is that they're kind of using it almost exactly upside down, which is that rather than Buddhism in all of its forms is trying to get rid of the ego, or to at least show you that the ego is something that's constructed. And a lot of the meditation, I think this is what you're calling, the different type of these hacks, are ways of creating a better ego so that then you can go out into the marketplace and be a better entrepreneur, or create yourself as a better product at work so that you'll do better. And I don't. That's just not. There's nowhere in Buddhism that's the point of it, right? Does that make sense? And I feel like I'm jumping around a little bit. So,
well, you're following me, and I'm jumping around like crazy because these are thoughts that have that have
Yeah.
sort of been sparking and started coalescing when I read your piece and got in touch with you. But I guess one question is it the, you said like the Dalai Lama has an app that you think is good Buddhism. Before you said that, I was thinking like, is it the medium? Like the fact that it's a smartphone, like for example, I do a lot of stuff on Facebook with groups where from my perspective, it's totally sort of selfless, helping people, not asking for money in return, just trying to, to do good things in the world that I believe in. And it gets drowned out. Nobody sees it because I'm not making enough money to pay Facebook to boost things. It doesn't make any sense for me to do it. So within the context of Facebook, it's almost impossible to not be capitalist. And I'm wondering within the medium, this is very Marshall McLuhan, but the medium of the iPhone or the Android phone, is it possible to sneak in, true spirituality?
So there always seems to be two things. At least there's like three and a half things.
Okay.
Two things. One is, so digital media as it exists today is really kind of a byproduct of that neoliberal deregulation. And in the ideology behind it, the whole ideology that everybody can be an expert, and the good part of that is it allowed a lot of voices. But the downside about that is that there is no gatekeepers at this point. There's no experts telling, helping people figure out what is real and not real information. And I think that's built into the medium to a certain extent, right? At this point. So like Facebook, is who can use the most all caps gets heard rather than the person who has some notion of knowledge about it. And so there's almost this downplay of expertise. So people who do have some type of knowledge are seen as somehow being corrupt, and and so I think that actually is built into the medium a little bit. I don't know if I would agree with McLuhan that there's some kind of social determinism involved in the medium. That the medium is a message. I think that you can use the media in such a way that it doesn't have to reinforce those. Mm-hmm. There's the famous saying, you can use the master's tools for your own house, right? And I think you can, but I think
you can't use the master's tools to tear down the master's house. Right?
Yeah. So and truthfully, if you talked to me 6 weeks ago before the stay-at-home order started, I probably would have been less skeptical. But I'm now I'm very skeptical now of mediated communication as somehow being as good as face-to-face communication. And it could just be me as a social being wanting to talk to people face-to-face.
Right.
But I've been trying to manage people over Zoom, and it's really, it's much easier for me at least to do it in person. And I've been doing these, and I sound like such a curmudgeon. I feel like I've been doing all these I've been doing a lot of Zazen online, and it's just not the same as doing it in person. And a lot of my early work a lot of my early scholarship was trying to actually argue the other position, that it was just as good, or so yeah. I feel like I'm undoing my earlier work, but I do think that I do think that if I had to put it really succinctly, I would say that I don't think the message is completely determined by the medium, but I do think that it affords certain types of human interactions, and affords a technical term that kind of it means that the meaning of a statement is channeled by which type of media it's used. So like you could open a door, you could kick a door open, but the doorknob affords a particular way of doing it. So I'll turn this off here. Sorry about that. Yes, of course, here I am distracted by my phone.
Well, so it represents somebody wanting your attention in the real world somewhere.
Right, and the little dopamine fix goes, oh, someone likes me. Ging. Yeah. So let me try to put this more straightforwardly. I do think that the digital media affords that kind of disinterested, egotistical way of being in the world. But I don't think it completely determines it. I do think you can use it in such a way that it doesn't. Bev would probably disagree with me, right? The other author, and she was always much more. She really thinks that these are inauthentic forms of Buddhist spirituality. Not to speak.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you wrote I think in the chapter in which you talk about the woman in 23A in the plane, you talk about like theory of like the iPhone is the ultimate tool of individualism, right? We've got these earbuds. We're literally shutting out the rest of the world. We have a screen that only we can watch. Like when my kids want to show me something on the phone, I'm like, can we see this on a computer so I can, because it atomizes us. And the two things that are in my head right now. One is I just saw the Mr. Rogers documentary. In which, at the end, Tom Junod, one of the journalist whose story is then told in the Tom Hanks fictional movie, says the question is whether, like, Mr. Rogers tried to use television for a completely different purpose. The question is, did he succeed? And it's like, well, he was able to do this, but he didn't really shift the culture in any perceivable way. And so I'm wondering whether like the smartphone is just immune to anything other than atomized individualism.
And what I would probably take the middle path and say it's not immune to it, but it really does channel or afford a particular kind of animistic form of communication. And at one point it was really, really charismatic and interesting. I mean, if you can think back to when computers first came, there was there was this notion that they would create this agora without slaves, this open marketplace in which everybody could freely interact as equals. And those of us who have lived through it can see that that's not where we ended up. We ended up with Facebook, and people who can trigger the most individuals are the ones that get their message out, rather than those who are arguing logically.
Right. And we have an agora in which 6 billion users are working for free for Zuckerberg.
Right. Yeah. So it's an agora without slaves, but it's a bunch of people who are freely giving their labor and not being compensated for it, right? Yeah. So, I mean, I guess I'm, early on, I was pretty much, I was excited about the digital media revolution. At this point, I'm skeptical about it for those very reasons. But that said, it's not like we're going to be able to put it back. We can't put the genie back in the bottle. We're not going to somehow become, neo-Amish and get rid of all our digital media.
Right. Well, unless the calamity, I mean, oil is at negative dollars per barrel. Like,
yeah, they're paying people to take it. Yeah, and again, we're actually speaking at a very interesting point because we have no clue what's going to happen next. It slowed down a little bit, but it seemed like every 2 days it was a completely different story. So it would be interesting to see.
Yeah. Well, and in terms of your statement, like, we're not going to put the genie back in the bottle. We're not going to become neo-Amish. Like I have seen, like, the groups I'm involved in on Facebook, I'm part of a lot of sort of permaculture back to the land groups who are saying, see, like the only way civilization is going to survive is if we, go back to relatively self-sufficient local homesteads. And then I see like Ray Dalio giving an interview in which he's like, this is a really exciting time. Technology is going to take off. More and more people are going to be comfortable with Zoom and these other things. And, there's like this, the singularity idea, which sort of like echoes something Buddhist or Eastern, doesn't it? Like,
so the singularity idea, again, it would be hard put to find some Eastern religion that backed it up. I don't know. I'm not an expert enough to even know where to start looking. But the whole notion that there's going to come a point where, and it maybe this is how there's going to come a point where a universal consciousness erupts because of the interconnectedness of the different media. Is that how you understand the singularity? Or
I guess, yeah. Yeah, that we and machines will be one, and we will all be one.
And I guess I sound like such a skeptic at this point. I just, I just see that as being, if anything, what this pandemic has showed me is that human beings really haven't evolved much at all, and that we're kind of in the same place that we were. We're just the same. We're the same. I mean, maybe we have some better bells and whistles, but I mean, there's little difference between this and the influenza epidemic of 1917, right?
That's so funny to think about that, to strip away, like when you see the inherent irrationality of human responses.
Yes, yeah, yeah. So I mean, I don't really, again, I don't think that the humans haven't come that far in the last 100 years, and so this notion that somehow that utopian notion that somehow we'll reach a singularity with the different types of technology. If anything, I feel much more distant from that than I would have, a month and a half ago, right? I mean, I feel that we're much more basic and primal than that.
Well, and when you look at like the two companies that have probably done the most to move us towards, the utopian technological future, Google and Facebook, right? Google was like, when we have all this information, we're just going to make the right decisions. And Facebook is, Zuckerberg, when he wasn't like rating female students in his Harvard dorm, was like, this is going to make, bring the world closer together and make us connected. And we've seen exactly the opposite from both.
Well, that's the thing. And there's a two, what I would call, kind of false axioms. One is this notion that information and wisdom are the same thing. And that the more, if you just give people more information, they're going to make the right choices. And that's not true. And the other one is the more interconnected we are, somehow the better off we'll be. That doesn't seem to be true either.
Right. Well, I think Google wasn't saying the more information you give people. It was saying the more information you give machines, and the better off we'll be. So that we've got all these, sort of black box algorithms that are supposed to run our world now. That take the meat suit primates out of the equation.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. Excuse me. I think, yeah, and again, algorithms. If you look at algorithms, they are black boxes, as you said, but they're human. They're created by people, and so they're not any. I mean, they're they're racist, they're sexist. They have all of the same foibles that the people who constructed them did. Even like face recognition. Face recognition has a really hard time recognizing people with darker skin because the people who constructed it were lighter skin for the most part. So it's not like by creating these tools that you're going to get away from the human foibles. In any way, and that's why I think there's a huge difference between wisdom and information, and exactly what that is, that would be a different podcast. But there's this notion that the more information you give people, the more they can get to, the wiser they'll be in their decision-making process. And I think the last 4 years have proven that not true, right? So,
yeah. So I kind of want to come back to the apps, and like give people people listening to this and maybe they've liked Calm or 10% Happier or Headspace, and now they're like, oh, like, am I just a neoliberal tool? Like, I stopped using Headspace because I felt like I was too tethered to my phone. Like, the thing that I needed Headspace for was to manage my phone addiction. And it was just playing into that. Do you have recommendations for people to either to use it in a different way, to take back control and, subvert part of the programming, or to drop it? Or how do we get our both, health benefits of mindfulness and spiritual benefits.
So I should say, I would come at it from a Buddhist point of view, which would be a middle path. So don't completely give it up, and don't completely get addicted to it, but be mindful of how you're using it and use it sparingly, probably more than you want. And realize that they're made to be addictive. The apps are made to draw you in. Like as we were talking earlier, and my phone rang, right? It's made to get my attention. And so I think there's two main ways. So I would say you don't have to stop using it. I think that would be, especially if it's helping you. If it's doing something that's useful for you. But do be mindful of how much you're using it. And it might be good to take like digital Sabbaths, where you. I try to do this on the weekend, which is actually take my phone and put it away. And like you were talking about permaculture earlier. I like to garden, and when I garden, I purposely keep my phone as far from me as I can. And I really do think that you start to have some deeper types of self-reflection when you're away from your phone. You might have less of that, and it might not be as easy to turn into something which then you can monetize. Mm-hmm. But I do think that you have there's parts of what it means to be human that you need to have when you're not near your digital device.
Right.
And I should say this is pretty radical for me, because I was always the one arguing the other position earlier in my career. So, but I really do think it's important to take time away from your phone, especially when we're in quarantine like this, because we're spending so, I don't know how you are, but I'm spending so much time on the computer and so much time talking to people. It's really important for me to put the phone down and take a walk or something like that. And I don't know if I've answered your question. It was a wiggly middle path.
Well, I appreciate any academic who can question their previous work and be thoughtful. I don't come across that all that often. But one thing that came to me when you said, like, put your phone down when you garden or go for a walk, like I've been doing that to a certain extent, but part of me is like, damn it, I'm not counting those steps. Like there's something addictive about the quantification.
That's the commodification, right? Or the quantification, right? That if it's not recorded, it didn't happen.
Right. And I know Headspace, was heavily quantified. Like it would tell me my streaks. It would tell me how many minutes. It was like, oh, look how spiritual or look how mindful I am. And I really liked that.
And I think that can be good if it's helping you work towards a goal. But I think ultimately it's just turning you into another commodity. It's, you're basically, your spirituality is no different from a can of soda or something, right? It turns it into this thing which can be quantified and sold or in some way.
Yeah.
And in our attention is that thing right now, which is what people are trying to capture. They're trying, someone said that like a minute of attention is worth like $5 or something. So they've quantified how much each minute of our attention is, and how do you capture that?
Wow, the $15 minimum wage feels woefully small.
Yeah, no, I forget. You could probably Google and find out, but there's like, so when people are creating these apps, they're figuring out how much attention it's going to catch, how much can they monetize that attention.
Mm-hmm. And of course, the other thing about meditation is you could sit and meditate, and it's meditation, or you could sit and not meditate, and it looks exactly the same. Right? Like there are days when I get up from my morning and go, I don't even know if I meditated.
Right. And again, you don't want, I would hate to, you could probably find some like a Fitbit or something that would measure whether you were meditating or not.
Yeah.
I just think that's going in the wrong direction at this point. I think we need to consciously get away from quantifying and commodifying our behaviors. And again, do I do it all the time? No. But I purposely don't. at this point, I purposely don't count my steps. I don't. Um, I try to push it back against it because it makes me feel less human. If you want to know the truth, I just start to feel like if my self-worth is only coming about through these different ways of measurement, I push back against it, I think.
Right. Although I think, when people get started, like when I started becoming a serious runner, I found the measurement and the sharing, the social sharing of my miles and steps and pace was very motivating. And because my default was to kind of be really squirrely and sneaky about, oh yeah, I did it. And to have, a bright line shone on my effort felt really good. But then, there's all these stories like for the runners out there will understand this. A lot of us use Garmin watches, which then posts to Strava. And often there's a tiny discrepancy between Garmin and Strava. So you'll see people who have just posted like an 11.99 mile run. And it'll drive them crazy. Like they're just going to run around their driveway for another 30 seconds to get to 12. So that the number itself becomes the goal as opposed to the act or the benefit or the doing for its own sake.
And I guess my thing would be not to completely get rid of all of that, but to be mindful of it and have some parts of your life where you're not doing that. Mm-hmm. And for me, that's working in the garden. I don't measure how many hours I put in or how many peas I plant. But like, in the morning I meditate and I time how long I'm there. And I have some friends who think that's ridiculous. They're just like, you should just meditate, so I would say take a middle path, right, between the two. Especially when you're first trying to get a habit going. I think that stuff helps a lot.
Yeah.
So
the other thing I wanted to ask you about is the role of the body in all this, because when I'm on my phone, I can feel extremely disembodied, like I'm somewhere else, I'm experiencing something, I'm in my head. And with the pandemic, like the problem with humans is that we have these bodies. Like if we were all just digital, then then nothing would be wrong. Now Headspace starts out, and I guess the other ones maybe do too, by having you like do a little body scan, and there's a lot of body awareness in the apps themselves. I don't even know what my question is, but what's the relevance of the body in this conversation?
I think I find, and this is a totally academic answer, which is what I really find interesting about with the digital media in the body is before digital media, we never really thought about the body. There was no reason to even think about it. But then all of a sudden there became this notion that when we go online or we go into these digital spaces, that our bodies somehow stay somewhere else. And for me, that's, like when you read a book, you don't think, oh God, I'm leaving my body behind, I'm going into the book. Or when I watch a film, you don't think, okay, I'm leaving my body behind, I'm going into the film. We don't think that way, but something about digital media invites us to think that we're leaving our bodies behind and going into this other space, which I think is really interesting. I don't know why that is. Some of it I think is ideological, and that's just how it is. It may be that when we go into these spaces, there's other people there, so somehow we think that, like in our conversation here, like where is our conversation taking place, right? Is it in Pittsburgh or is it in Greensboro? Is it like somewhere, I don't know, would it be in between Asheboro? What would be, so I know I'm not answering your question at all, but I thought a lot about the thing I love most about, I like to think, and then what is our body, right? Is our body, is it just where our skin ends? Do our clothes count as our body? Like when I cut my hair, how long is it part of my body, and when does it not become part of my body? I know these are like, I'm not answering your question at all, other than with my own curiosity about it.
But I didn't even ask a question, so
yeah.
I can't blame you for that. I mean, but working in the garden, like I can't help but think like what I'm growing now is going to be my body, My body right now, I'm working out, is burning fat. I'm exhaling carbon dioxide that the plants are going to be breathing in. Like, I mean, part of me thinks like that's maybe like the most Buddhist thing ever, is that yeah, there's a body and it's boundaryless in some ways.
Yeah, I mean, you can look at it. I mean, there's like the literal body, right? You pinch yourself and it hurts.
Hmm.
There's the social body, which is us interacting with different people and different animals and different plants, right? Human and non-human things. And then ultimately, there really is no body because 100 years from now, we won't be, our bodies won't be here. All right. So I mean, I really, it sounds ridiculous. I really like to think about the body a lot. I just like to think about it as and like I don't, you don't seem like the type of person who would play a video game, but like I play a lot of video games.
You have me
And
pegged.
and and when your character in the video game, something happens to it, you
Hmm.
react, your body reacts,
Hmm.
even though you like you like someone something will like you. And so the question is where does the body, where if I touch you on the screen, right, am I touching your body?
Uh-huh.
uh and so I know this is all just kind of abstract.
Well, but
So
I remember reading not too long ago an article about like this online gamer, this woman in South Africa who's like a star gamer, and her physical regimen, like total athlete, like 2 hours in the gym and eat and watching her food. It's that's not my what I thought, from like Ready Player One. Like, I felt like really obese, unhealthy, pasty people who never leave their lair.
yeah, so these the whole esports, especially in Korea and Europe now, they have these esports leagues. I don't know if you
Mhm.
follow these at all, but there'd be like,
I've seen that they exist.
so you'll have like 20,000 people in a auditorium watching people play video games.
Uh-huh.
And they are athletes in the sense that they do, I mean, they work out, they have to have really good reflexes. It's not the kind of the stereotype of a pasty teenager down in their basement somewhere, right? I mean, they are working out. Um, but my thing is like, where does the body extend into that virtual space, or does it end at the screen? What
Uh-huh.
counts? Because if you think of spiritually, um, at different traditions, your parts of your body can extend outside of the physical into other realms, right? And
Hmm.
so does digital media do that, or do we use those those pretty ancient spiritual notions, to think of how of digital media? Do we use those ancient, to think about it? Um,
Right. So
because like
is Second Life actually part of the multiverse?
yeah, or even more, I mean, human beings have had multiverses for a long time. I mean, you can look at like the old caves that in the paleo and in the Neolithic, and where those were kind of virtual spaces. You have the different cathedrals in Europe with those virtual spaces, and so I mean, you need to really talk about digital virtual spaces, which are they're fun. We talked about the inauthenticity of different type of spiritual practice in digital realms, which is something you could talk about. But it's also just interesting to think. There's no doubt that the digital media has forced us to rethink a lot of the kind of basic notions of what it means to be human.
Hmm.
And for me, those questions are more interesting, really, than is it authentic or inauthentic.
Right. And
Um,
for me, the question, the interesting part for me is, could you imagine a universe in which this grew organically as wikis, as collective bottom up experiences rather than capitalist? Like, what would did the digital world look like if it was all, you know, Craig Space and Wikipedia and open source as a,
and I think the thing is, I think you're right, right? And so there's a left leaning libertarianism and a right leaning, but both of them come out of they come out of this neoliberal ideology, right? That the way to solve our problems now is not with large institutional systems, but with these kind of organic, ground up, just kind of things which grew. And again, I'm not saying that's wrong, but I think it's interesting to think about that not as an inevitable or necessarily good, but it may be that other types of human organizations might actually serve us better than that kind of Wikipedia one. Again, what that would look like, I don't know. I just, I'm much better at raising questions than I am at answering
Good.
anything, right?
I know lots of people with answers, and
Yeah.
I don't find them very helpful most of the time. So I think, I mean, especially in the last few weeks with the pandemic, but seeing where our civilization seems to be going into some kind of new thing that none of us can predict, I think questions are awfully useful. And being able to put, like, what I love about our conversation, one of the things I'm loving about it is how you're putting a very new phenomenon into a historical context, into cathedrals and caves, and books and movies.
Yeah, digital media didn't come out of the thin air. I mean, it has a background. It has a background at least 2,000 years, and it's not. We think of it as revolutionary. In some ways, it was, but at the same time, it does have there's a prehistory to it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think really it's important. I think that you never have so much faith in something that you're not willing to have your mind changed. So I mean, I don't have enough faith in anything not to have. I'm always willing to have my mind changed, and I think that's really important. That we, even when we talk about all of this stuff. So, I mean, even with the Buddhist apps, this is just how I'm thinking about it at the moment, and and I'm hoping that it will help people in the world suffer less. But I'm always willing to be talked out of it.
Right. So is there? I know you've talked about research on health and mental health. Is there research related to what you're writing about around, is it Buddhist? Is it ego boosting or ego dissolving? How would you even study that?
I don't know. So you couldn't study it. You couldn't study it like a social scientist, because there's no way to make an argument whether it's Buddhist or not Buddhist. I think you could study it from religious studies point of view, and argue about it. You could make arguments about it which would be answered from a humanistic point of view rather than a scientific point of view. And that's where I would put myself. So I'm basically making arguments, and the evidence is not so much scientific data, but more stories, and really just more stories, basically stories. That would be my evidence. It's, no one, it's not scientific in the sense of being quantifiable, but it is scientific in the sense of being systematic, systematic ways of thinking. I don't know. Does that answer your question? I feel like I veered off to the side there again.
Well, I mean, I think it's also relevant as a meta question in this civilization. What counts as evidence, and what counts as questions worthy of asking? Can you ask questions that you can't, answer with a survey tool or, something objective?
Yeah, and I think the problem is we get into this either or, that it's either a objective answer or that it's completely subjective, so that it's either one answer or a gazillion. And I think there's a ground for a medium place of a well argued, non-quantifiable answer to things, and I think we lose a lot of that. That might be what I would call wisdom. We lose a lot of that in digital media, and we lose a lot of it through platforms such as Facebook, in which everybody seems to have the same amount of expertise. So and again, I feel like I'm sounding old-fashioned, but I really do think that it's helpful to have certain gatekeepers to help keep the knowledge from getting just spun out of control. So everybody, if arguing that the moon is made of cheese, you could say, of course it's made of cheese. That's what I say. Anybody could say that, and that seems to be what a lot of the arguments are on.
Right.
On Facebook.
Well, here's something that's been bugging me about arguments on Facebook and digital media in general lately. Is so I'm involved. I'm part of a scientific medical community. Some of those people are sort of very mainstream. I'm also, an advocate of plant-based nutrition, and so there's some people who think, well, there's not quite the evidence, and if the government is lying to us about that, what else are they lying to us about? And so, like, I am friends with people who are very smart, very well educated. I think largely of good faith, and I could have predicted, with 100% accuracy, how they would have come down on the pandemic, on is it worse than the flu, on is it sort of a hoax, on should we be quarantined, should we not be quarantining. And they're all bringing up evidence. They're showing studies from Sweden. They're showing death rates. They're showing all, but they're disagreeing with each other. But I could have told you in advance which, based on their characters, what they would have believed. It's bugging me, honestly.
Right. And for me, a good study is one that changes your mind. You don't want to use, the good evidence is the evidence which shows that you're wrong to yourself. So, I mean, they're really using evidence in a non-scientific way, because when you're using evidence, you're not trying to bolster your argument. You're trying to show that your argument is wrong. And it's, So what's wrong really is not their evidence, but their methodology of how they're using it.
That makes such sense.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it really does.
And so that's what's going on with the Facebook is people are not really, they're arguing, they're not having logical arguments. They're not,
well, they're trying to win.
They're trying to win. And that's all they're trying to do.
Instead of trying to discover the truth.
Exactly. That's yeah. So rather than having a conversation in which you try to come to some type of truth, they're just trying to win their point of view.
Mm-hmm. Which is exactly, I think, what you were saying about the apps.
Right. Yeah. And again, on Facebook, how do you win? You win by triggering the most people. How many people can you own? I own that person, which I guess means that you made them mad. And when Facebook first came out, I really tried to have conversations, meaningful conversations on it, but quickly realized that was impossible. So now I just post pictures of cats. So, and again, this is like the old curmudgeonly me. If you got these people in a room together around a table and actually were talking, the conversations wouldn't go like that.
Right.
I don't know why. I mean, this would be an interesting study, right? Why, if you're talking to someone face to face, you won't be trying to win in that same way. And I don't know. I don't have the answer to that one.
No, I've certainly felt while I was typing the same way someone feels when they're reaching for the bottle after being abstinent for 20 years. This is such a bad idea. Put it down. Don't hit return. And sometimes I do, and sometimes I don't.
It would be really interesting to see if you could design a digital platform which afforded meaningful conversations rather than arguments. And I have no idea what it would look like. But the platforms are not designed to create community. They're not designed to further knowledge. They're designed to make money. And we try to use them for these other things because it's all we got.
Right. So I guess they're calling out for a really exquisite mindfulness about the fact that we are trying to subvert these tools ultimately. That to use an iPhone or Facebook or Google or an app to truly improve ourselves and be mindful and discover the truth is using it off-label to some extent.
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways it's using it's like you're swimming upstream. You're using it against the current of how it's been designed to be used. I mean, they're really not used. I mean, yeah. So digital, they really are used to trigger your attention and get your attention to keep, so they're not, I mean, they're made to like keep you kind of dinging along from little dopamine hit to dopamine hit, and not to have the deep reflections. I don't know if you've ever read the book. It's a really good book called by Walter Ong, who's he's a I think he might have just passed away, but he was a Catholic priest actually. He wrote this really good book called the Presence of the Word, which is all about how different types of media construct different types of spirituality.
Huh.
And there's a little bit of the curmudgeon in him that he's saying that when we get away from oral communication, that we're getting away from true spirituality.
That's funny.
But there may be some.
I'm in the middle of reading The Alphabet versus the Goddess by Leonard Shlain, which pretty much says the same thing, that written language preferences a masculine perspective. And once we had written language, then the goddess religions had to die out.
I think, yeah, and he's not going to argue that because he's a Catholic priest, but he's basically going to say that, for him, the High Middle Ages was like, that's when we were the most spiritual. Again, I don't know if I want to live in the High Middle Ages, but it is interesting to think about what type of spirituality does digital media construct in people, right? Because, and it may not, at the same time that we re-question how the economy is put together and we re-question how our lives and work are put together, it's also a time in this pandemic to rethink about how we use different types of digital media to communicate. And it may be that we don't want them at the center. It may be that they can be useful tools for certain things, but maybe there's other types of human communities and institutions which may be more beneficial to spirituality than
right. Well,
Buddhist.
It's like sexting can be a condiment, but it shouldn't be the main course.
Yeah, when I did a study in Second Life on sex, like basically Second Life sex, and someone described it, and I just remember this. They described it like having your body squished up against a plane of glass and having people put honey on the outside. And